and welcome back to Teacher Jeff 40K. Recently, I decided I wanted to put together a 750 point list as sort of a general rubric or outline for new players or existing players on what a decent list looks like when it comes to not necessarily knowing what you're going to deal with. And I thought I would do that with a much larger army this time. So I decided to make a 2,000 point list. And that list is meant to deal with pretty much anything that can be thrown at you relatively well. So you're not hard focusing on something like, say, anti-tank weaponry or psychers or what have you. This list is designed to be useful if you just don't know what you're coming up against. So very often it'll happen, you go to a gaming store or a club or something, and you don't know who you're going to play against, or you don't know what army you're going to deal with. Sometimes, a guy that you know the army he's going to play, but he has so many models that it could go one way or the other. He could have lots of infantry one week, and then, a mechanized force the next week with a lot of tanks and other vehicles. So this list is 2,000 points of Space Marines. I'm using the Salamander's Chapter Tactics because I believe it to be one of the most well-rounded universal chapter tactics. Again, it can deal with everything. Each of the units gets to re-roll 1 to hit and 1 to wound whenever they shoot or fight. Just very useful through and through. Now, even though I am making a Space Marine force, some of the ideas behind these units and why they are included in the list, they can be applied to any army. So this is think of it as a rubric, and I'm slotting in Space Marines, but you could just as easily do it with Dark Eldar or Tau or something like that. Just sort of general ideas. It is a relatively shooty list, so some armies might not be able to cope with that, say like orcs. But you can get units that do sort of the same things based on what their intended job and target is. Even if you go more melee-centered, you could have melee stuff that is effective more against vehicles or monsters, and then some other stuff that's more effective against infantry. So, without further ado, I've got my list here, and I'm going to go over just some general ideas, and then I'll go over the units that I'm putting in the list, and why I have them there. So, like I said, 2,000 points. It actually comes out to 1998. It's Salamanders. And yes, the idea is to basically take on all comers. So deal with pretty much anything that could be thrown at you. I also, it's got a great balance of things in terms of speed, anti-tank and anti-infantry weaponry, volume of fire for certain units, the ability to castle up, the ability to move as well, and also the ability to deal with objective-based missions. So the idea behind this list is you have no idea what mission you're going to play, what the board is going to look like, and what and who your opponent is. So let's have a look at the units. I have 2 detachments that I've chosen. So I'll start with the first detachment, and that is a Battalion Detachment. So that will give me, since the FAQ came out, a bonus of 5 extra command points. So I have 3 command points for being a battle-forged army, and I have 5 extra command points for the battalion, which I'll go over now. So the battalion requires 2 HQs and 3 troops. So the 2 HQs for my battalion detachment, I have taken, I guess I'll show them here first, a Tech Marine. You may have seen this guy before. I've talked about the Tech Marine. He's a very cheap HQ choice. I've equipped him with a chainsword to replace his power axe, And I have not taken the servo harness because it's frankly very overcosted. So for 57 points, you get a bare bones tech marine, capable of repairing vehicles. Quite good. And the other HQ choice I've taken is a near bare bones lieutenant. So he has his chainsword on his back. He's got a master-crafted bolt gun, so that one costs you 3 points. But it's kind of worth it. And he is going to be more of a backfield character anyhow, so the ranged weapon is not a bad choice. He comes in at 63 points. So those are my 2 HQs. I've kept them relatively cheap, but they are useful for their intended jobs. The Tech Marine will repair vehicles, whether he's inside one or close to one. And the Lieutenant will be giving out his aura ability of re-rolling ones to wound. So 2 very reasonable, cheap HQ choices. Then, for the 3 troop slots, I have taken a Space Marine Tactical Squad. I'll put them right here. So, nothing special about these guys, other than their weapons. So, it's 5 Marines, and I've taken on the Sergeant a Combi Plasma, and then a Plasma Gun for the special weapon. That's it. The other 3 guys are bolters. So, the job of this team is basically as backup, as support. They are there to support the list. This will become more obvious when I start placing down other units that I have. But ideally, Plasma is one of the best weapons for dealing with just about anything. It's got high strength, strength 7, it's got great AP, and if you do decide to supercharge it, it can deal 2 damage, which means it can reasonably deal with several different types of targets. So having 2 plasma weapons in a squad is quite good. And then of course their real role for this squad here, I'll put the Sergeant out front, is as an objective capturer. So not only can they throw it a little bit of punch, but they can capture objectives. And they stay relatively cheap at 5 guys. Then, to transport them, I've given them a Razorback with a twin las cannon and a Storm Bolter. So the idea for this is I will be keeping this Razorback a little farther back in my field, in my deployment zone, so that the 5 guys will stay inside, and this will start launching out shots with the las cannon, so every couple of turns. My opponent may target it, in which case maybe my guys will get out. But the idea behind this is I have the Razorback in my backfield. You can't quite see it, so I'll move this here. I have the Razorback in the backfield. There we go. Got to see those lasers. And the idea for them is just fire the lasers across the field, deal some damage, and then later in the game, as my force has dwindled or maybe I've been moved around a lot, these guys can lend support wherever they're needed. I can decide to either move the Razorback up or simply deploy these guys out of the Razorback to either capture an objective nearby, lend a little bit of fire support to something, and also these guys will help if anyone decides to deep strike into my lines. I will have a small support squad that could lend a hand. So they have a variety of jobs, and it's still a relatively cheap unit. I'll have to move my book here as I place more things. So, the next troop choice is a classic. Sniper Scouts. So I have a squad of 5 scouts, all with sniper rifles and camo cloaks. These are good for sitting on an objective, targeting characters, and they also receive a bonus to their armor save when they're in cover, so they do really well in a terrain piece. What scouts also do is basically push out your deployment zone. So because they can deploy outside of your deployment zone, it limits the space that your opponent may be able to deep strike into. So that's quite good. So I've taken 1 squad of these guys. They're very good at targeting characters. But I've also taken another squad of scouts for my 3rd troop choice. And they're a little different. They have bolt guns. Where are the other 2? Here we go. And a heavy bolter. Again, they're supposed to be cheap, so at 65 points you get a squad of 5 with a heavy bolter. So they can throw out a little bit of firepower, but again, they can stay on objectives, and because they're scouts, they can deploy a little farther out. So that right there is the completed battalion detachment, or the requirements of the battalion. 2 HQs and 3 troop choices. I have included some other things in that battalion, most notably a lot of elite units. So I'll go through those now. The elites, I have 2 of these guys. 2 venerable dreadnoughts. So the venerable dreadnought hits with shooting and close combat on 2s, which is very good, and it has a rule to ignore wounds on a 6+, which is a nice bonus over the regular dreadnought. Both of these are equipped the same way. Twin las cannon, missile launcher. He's going to be hitting on 2s. This is basically, extra damage. Las cannons are fantastic. They're sort of a go-to for tank and monster hunting for Space Marines and a lot of the Imperium armies in general. And that's why I have these las cannons here as well. I like to have a lot of my firepower spread across different units. This also works especially well with the Salamander Chapter tactic, allowing each of the individual units to re-roll 1 to hit and 1 to wound every time. Although the Razorback, being a vehicle, will not receive chapter tactics. But dreadnoughts do, which is quite good. So I've also gone through, most of this list is either infantry, bike, or dreadnought, with a couple of exceptions. So the majority, like 95% of the army, will be able to use chapter tactics and take advantage of this. That is also a great advantage when you have multiple small units, which means this squad of scouts gets 1 reroll to hit and wound, this squad of scouts does, each of these characters do, each of these dreadnoughts do, and this squad does as well. Which means you're doling out rerolls across your whole army, and it allows you to economize the command points that you take, so you don't necessarily need to use those, as I always seem to do, for rerolls. I can use them for other unique stratagems or things like that. So, these 2 venerable dreadnoughts, backfield fire support. Very damage dealing and very reliable to hit. Then, another elite choice I have taken. Oh no, I'll get to that later actually. I did take another heavy support, a heavy support choice. What I meant by another is that I have a lot more las cannons here. So, I have a squad of Devastators from the heavy support slot with 4 las cannons. Then the Sergeant has a chainsword and stormbolter. That's just how the points worked out. I had the 2 points for the stormbolter. It's always a good option. It's basically doubling the shots of a bolt gun. So the Sergeant, and then I've added 2 extra Marines with bolt guns. These are very much worth the 13 points a guy to basically take wounds for the rest of the squad. So when the Devastators inevitably get targeted, the first couple of wounds that go through, I can kill these guys off and save my precious las cannons and the Sergeant as well. So I usually like to run at least 2 of these guys. I call these guys my meat shields because they are exactly that. They basically tank the wounds for the more important guns. So I have that. So you'll see I have a lot already of anti-tank firepower. Now, I have balanced this out as well with some anti-infantry firepower, which I'll show you in a moment. But, as it stands, I have 10 las cannons to use, and they are all spread out. So, if someone takes care of my Devastator squad, eats through these 2 guys, and then kills a bunch of them, I still have this Dreadnought, and the twin las cannon on this Razorback. So I'm getting I'm getting my anti-heavy from multiple sources. This is also useful for anti-anything, basically. If you have a job that needs doing, don't try and get necessarily one super big unit to do that job. An example of that would be Centurion Devastators with las cannons and missile launchers. It's nearly 500 points for the unit, and while they do an incredible job at knocking tanks out, that's a lot of your army wrapped up into one unit. And if that unit goes down, you will feel it. But if I lose this Dreadnought, kaboom, he explodes, it sucks, that's terrible. I still have some anti-tank here, another Dreadnought for redundancy, and then this Devastator team. So it does the job well at splitting it up. And once again, this Devastator team will be able to separately take advantage of the chapter tactics. So, yes, that's right. I have 2 more elites that I wanted to put in. So, those 2 elites will be put in a drop pod. I have 1 drop pod right here for 85 points. So I put 2 5-man squads of Stern Guard veterans. So, 1 sergeant has a chainsword and a special issue bolt gun, and then the other 4 guys have special issue bolt guns. And the second team is exactly the same. Chainsword, special issue bolt gun. So the chainsword is a free upgrade, and it allows the sergeant of each squad to have more attacks in close combat. Because they are veterans, they have 2 attacks. The sergeants have 3, and add the chainsword, that's 4. So he will be getting 4 attacks if he gets into close combat. That's not his job, but it's a free upgrade. You can take it over the bolt pistol, which I would recommend, definitely. And then he still gets access to a special issue bolt gun. So, special issue bolt guns are just like regular bolt guns, except for 2 key features. 1, they have 30-inch range instead of 24, which is nice, but the real nice thing about these guys is they are -2 AP, which means each team at 15 inches, so half range, will be pumping out 10 shots that are all -2 AP. And again, since they are 2 individual squads, they will be 2 different targets and units, which allows them each to take advantage of the chapter tactics for salamanders. 1 reroll to hit and wound, 1 reroll to hit and wound. Again, the drop pod as a transport and vehicle does not take advantage of chapter tactics, but that doesn't matter, it's only got a Stormbolter. So these guys dole out a solid amount of anti-infantry firepower. They are great at dealing with pretty much every type of infantry, barring the super duper heavy ones like Terminators and stuff like that. But they even do a so-so job at that. They're great for dealing with other marine types, so like with a 3+ armor save, that becomes a 5+ with the special issue bolt guns. And anything like guardsmen or anything with 5+ armor just straight up doesn't get a save. So it's a decent amount of firepower, and they are cheap too. Each unit with their special issue bolt guns is 90 points. So it's 90 points, 90 points, and then 85 for the pod. And again, these are 3 individual units. So when this drops down, 2 units get out. Your opponent will have to target 2 units to take them both out. So I've added those together. Again, that is still part of the Battalion Detachment. Then I took 1 more detachment, a smaller one, called the Outrider Detachment. The Outrider Detachment requires 1 HQ choice and 3 fast attack. So, for the HQ, I have taken probably my favorite character that I've ever made. This is a custom commander on bike, or captain on bike. So, he gets the added toughness of being T5 on a bike, And he gets movement 14. This allows him to move around the board with his wonderful reroll ones to hit aura ability. So this further adds to potential rerolls, even though you already have the chapter tactics for salamanders. It's redundancy for the rerolls. Again, you'll be able to save your command points for other things. But again, you've only got one captain, and he can't be everywhere at once. So when push comes to shove and he's somewhere else, you do still get your salamander chapter tactics, which allow you to re-roll some things. This guy I've decided to give some equipment to. I've decided he's going to be my warlord. He's going to be the guy who adapts to the different situations I'm put in. So I've given him a power fist and a combi melta. This allows him to be super dangerous in both the shooting phase and the close combat phase. He's already got a 4+ invulnerable save, a 3+ armor save, he's got toughness 5, and now he's got strength 8 attacks in close combat, and a combi melta. And that's in addition to the twin bolt gun on the front. So this allows him to both threaten heavier targets and lighter targets, and lend support around the board. Very solid unit. There are a couple of ways you could equip Warlord Traits and relics to this guy. So for durability, for example, you could give him the one, I forget what it's called. It basically gives him 1 more wound, which would make him 7 wounds, and on a 6+, you can ignore wounds. That would be very good at making him very resilient. And then you could take a relic, say either the Armor Indomitus to make him a 2+ armor save, or the Salamander specific one, which is, I think it's called Salamander's Mantle or something like that. It basically adds 1 point of toughness to him, which would make him toughness 6. So that could be good as well. And another warlord trait that might do him well, if you want him to be more offensive, is again the Salamander specific one, which is just +1 strength. And it's easy to remember. +1 strength is especially good here because the Power Fist is ×2 strength. So you're actually getting +2 strength, because a Power Fist on a Space Marine would attack at strength 8, but because his base strength goes up to 5, that's 5 × 2. It would be strength 10 with his Power Fist. Very strong. At 131 points, this is a very good, reliable, economic unit. It can pull its weight and do its job in a variety of scenarios. So I have that as the HQ of my Outrider Detachment and as my Warlord. Then, the other parts of the Outrider Detachment, I have three fast attack choices. I have a squad of 3 scout bikes. I love these guys a lot, actually. If you've watched any of my other videos, you might have heard me talk about them. I've mentioned them as one of my favorite units in the Codex. And as sort of a hidden gem as well. They are not the most damage dealing of units, but they do their job very well. This is a great harassment unit. They pump out enough shots to be a legitimate threat to light infantry. They each have a twin bolt gun on the top. So that is 2 shots, 2 shots, 2 shots, or if you are within 12-inch range, that is 4 shots of bike. And they all come stock equipped with Astartes shotguns, which is a further 2 shots at 12 inches, and if you are within half range of those shotguns, they are strength 5, not strength 4. Very solid. Again, it's standard equipment. You don't have to pay anything for them. And also, each of the scout bikes comes with a combat blade equipped. This is the same as a chainsword. It gives them another attack in close combat. So these guys, for 75 points, can dole out a lot of strength 4 firepower for just a 3-man unit. Very good. Then, I have a little bit one that's about double the price, but it's still 3 bikes. This is a squad of 3 bikes with 2 Melta guns and a combi Melta on the sergeant. This is 134 points. It's a little pricey, but you get 3 very mobile Melta guns, which means you can very easily get into Melta range with them, which is at half range, you're rolling 2d6 for the damage, and you pick the highest one. And again, because it's a small unit, and there's one of them, one unit like this, or rather, because it's yet another unit, you get a reroll to hit and to wound with them, because they are salamanders. So each individual unit, again, is getting that ability every time it shoots and fights. That includes Overwatch. So I've got these, and you can already see some potential strategies and synergy. With the captain can potentially go up with these other Melta bikers. He's got a Melta gun too. He can get them to reroll 1s if he wants to. You can reroll another one if you get a 2, for example, and then the rerolls to wound as well. You can rest assured that you will probably melt something. So there's that. And then the third fast attack choice rounds out the anti-infantry firepower. So I have a squad of 5 bikes. The first bike, the sergeant, has nothing except for a power maul. I put that on the side there. Now, the power maul is there just, again, for the points. It's 4 points. It gives him a couple of decent close combat attacks. But that's not really the focus of this squad. The focus, again, is anti-infantry. So I've given the 2 special weapons, I've given them flamers. So this means, in addition to their twin bolt guns, they can also fire flamers. It's the same strength, relatively short range. You're like the scout bikes, you're pumping out a lot of strength 4 firepower. So you can you can really hurt units with volume of fire, which is why I have added 2 more bikes to the squad. They cannot take heavy weapons, but again, it's just 2 more twin bolt guns, adding to the volume of fire. Plus, if these guys take some wounds, I can take off one of the regular bikes, or 2 of them, and I save the flamers and the sarge. So this rounds out the Vanguard unit, or the Outrider Detachment, excuse me. 1 HQ, 1, 2, 3 fast attack choices. And then, in one of the optional slots, either for the battalion or for the Outrider, I've taken a what I believe to be a very balanced unit for dealing with the unknown. So I have a Rhino with 2 Stormbolters, because Rhinos do actually have the option to take a second Stormbolter for 2 points. It's worth it 99% of the time. For only 2 points, your tank suddenly gets double the shots. And inside that Rhino, I have a squad of 5 company veterans. There is a sergeant with a combi plasma gun, and then 4 plasma gunners. So this squad is especially mean to heavy infantry. Basically, it's mean to other Marines. It cooks through the armor, it's high strength, and it's potentially damaging to light and medium vehicles as well. This I added in to round out the list. So it's something that can deal with just about everything. Much like this squad of tactical Marines, but even more so because it's just 5 plasma guns. They're mobile because they can get inside this vehicle, and there's a bit of targeting psychology to this. So you'll notice that I gave them a Razorback, the tactical squad, and I gave the plasma veterans a Rhino. When your opponent is targeting your units, which tank looks more threatening? The one with laser cannons on the back, right? Exactly. So this is the one he is more likely to target if given the opportunity between the 2 tanks. Which means that this Rhino has a little bit more survivability rolling up the field, and then it can deliver your plasma veterans. Some opponents may not fall for this, but some may not even notice. It might be one of those things, they see the las cannons on the back and they think, this thing needs to die. And if it does, that's too bad, you lose 2 las cannons. But that means some of the firing priority, anti-tank priority, was taken away from this Rhino, and it allows it to move up the board. Also, Rhinos have a very small ability called auto repair. At the start of each of your turns, on a 6, this can regain 1 wound. It's not game-changing, but it is there, and it adds a slight element of survivability to it. So, overall, in the list, I have things to deal with every possible scenario. I have fast units that can move up the board and harass my opponent. I have deep strike capability with the pod, which allows me to, on turn 1, drop it into my deployment zone, should I want to, or on turns 2 or 3, drop it anywhere on the board for some offensive fire. I have backline support in various areas with both of these dreadnoughts, and the las cannon devastators, and the las cannons on this, as well as the scout squad. I have 3 troop units if I need to take some objectives. I have support characters to give rerolls. And now, this Tech Marine, once you've sort of seen this list, he has a job to do. Repair things. He would probably be either inside this Razorback, repairing it, or he could be near both of these dreadnoughts and repair them as well, which would make 2 actually very resilient dreadnoughts, because he can heal D3 wounds each time. It has a 3-up save naturally. They're both toughness 7, and because they're venerable dreadnoughts, they can ignore wounds on a 6. Very solid. And they fit into a nice pocket at 8 wounds, which means they've got a relatively high amount of wounds, but because they haven't reached that 10 wound cap, there's no depreciation in talents, which means he is always hitting on a 2+, no matter what. If he's at 8 wounds or if he's at 1 wound, he always hits the same. And most of my things take advantage of the Salamander's chapter tactics. The only things that do not are this, the Razorback, the drop pod, and the Rhino. Otherwise, the rest of my army gets 1 reroll to hit and 1 reroll to wound every time. I have a balance of anti-infantry, so I've got some scouts with bolt guns, these guys here, the scout bikes, the flamer bikes, and of course the Stern Guard veterans. And then I've got anti-tank or heavy firepower, las cannons missile, more las cannons. And then some stuff in between. Sniper rifles for characters, and then a little plasma here and a lot of plasma over here. And that rounds it out. The only thing I haven't taken into account is psyker support. That is something at least personally, when I'm building a list, I would either take a bunch of psychers or none at all. And so I just kind of avoid the psychic phase altogether. This could be the one weakness to this list. If I don't have any psychers and I go up against, say, Grey Knights, I have no ability to deny psychic powers, but it's not the end of the world. That's a very, it's not, I've prepared for all of the other things, and honestly, if I were to take something out and put in a psyker, it would totally unbalance everything that I put together here. So I decided to avoid psychers altogether. I have objective capture, both anti-tank and anti-infantry in multiple units, so if 1 or 2 go down, others can do the same job. I have good deployment abilities with some deep striking and some scout moves, or rather advanced positions for the scouts. And I have faster units and I have backline support units. So this would allow me to deal with pretty much any scenario that Warhammer 40k can throw at you. Of course, minus dealing with a whole bunch of psychers. But yes, otherwise that's what I put together. Again, this is sort of a rubric for any army. You can take advantage of either chapter tactics, legion traits, regimental doctrines, whatever it's called in your army. There's one for Eldar too. Every codex has got it. The ability to take a specific trait from that codex and apply it to your army. So again, with those tactics, it's very good to keep it in mind when building a list, but you do not necessarily need to pick every unit based on that. Again, this force could very easily be an Iron Hands list for more resilience. I just prefer the rerolls of Salamanders. But again, these units can be replaced by other units in another codex. So for example, you could take, let's say you go with, let's take an army that's totally separate. Eldar, for example. So you take, what is it, a Wave Serpent with some, anti-tank firepower and a squad of, I guess they're Guardians, the troop choices. Yeah, you have a few of those. You could take the sniper guys. You could take some fire dragons inside a transport instead of these meltaguns. This can sort of be applied to any army. So fast anti-tank, fast anti-infantry. Cheap troop choices, very powerful long-range heavy support units. These as well. Deep strike capability, harassment. All those different types can be found in virtually every other codex in one form or another and can be applied in certain ways. Anyhow, I thought I'd put this together and try to build the most balanced for all comers list for 2,000 points, just as a way to show how you can put a list together without knowing what you're going to go up against. Anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments below if you do want any help with building any lists or ideas or anything like that. I'd be happy to help you. If you have ideas of things you love to take in your army that you think are great for dealing with a variety of targets, please let me know in the comments below.